Hello, and welcome to Blackboard's second Digital Teaching Symposium. My name is Darcy Hardy, and I am very excited that you have decided to join us today from wherever you are in the world. We have a great day planned for you with many topics to help you navigate what's next in digital teaching. This past year has most likely been one of the toughest years in your professional experience. I know it has been in mine. Balancing teaching from home, using technology, and working with students in a virtual environment can be challenging. Everyone should take a moment to be kind to yourselves and to be proud of all you have learned and accomplished over the last 12 months. So, cheers to all of you for all the hard work that you've done during the pandemic. But take that moment and enjoy it, because the next phase is not going to be easy either. And many of you will now have to adapt to a hybrid or high-flex model that accompanies a return to the classroom. The new normal is yet to be seen, and for every school, it may be slightly different and probably will be. We can't wait until fall to figure it out. Now is the time to learn from others and share your experiences. That's exactly why Blackboard is hosting this information-packed symposium, to help you navigate the unknown waters ahead. I'd like to take a moment and thank all of our speakers today for sharing their wisdom and their experience with us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. These symposium sponsors, McGraw-Hill, Hypothesis, Respondus, and our own Blackboard Academy, are critical to the success of a project like this, a symposium like this. You'll find the information in the symposium schedule about their sessions. Please try to attend those because they're extremely important to this event. Just a few reminders. Let me go to the next slide. Just a few reminders before we get started. If you miss any sessions, fear not, as they are being recorded and you can view them later. Don't forget to join our Blackboard community site so you can connect with people after the event. The conversation does not have to end after today's session, and it shouldn't. Finally, if you're tweeting today, and we hope you are, use the hashtag #DigitalTeaching2021. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, my personal friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Milliron. Mark is currently Senior Vice President and Executive Dean in the Teachers College at Western Governors University. WGU's Teachers College is now the largest college of education in the U.S., serving more than 30,000 teachers, leaders, and other education innovators in all 50 states. If you Google Mark, which I know many of you are right now probably, you can find a wealth of information about his work over the years. But for now, let me give you a short summary. Mark is an award-winning leader, author, speaker, consultant who works with universities, community colleges, K-12 schools, foundations, corporations, associations, and government agencies across the country and around the world, maybe where you are. In addition to his work with WGU, Mark helps catalyze, and that is a Mark term right there, catalyze. He helps catalyze positive change in education through his service on boards and advisory councils of leading edge education organizations. He also holds an appointment as a professor of practice in the College of Education at the University of Texas at Austin. Mark has been the recipient of many honors and awards, but most recently, in 2016, he was chosen by the Chronicle of Higher Education as one of the top technology innovators in higher education. And in 2018, Mark was listed by EdTech Digest as one of the top influencers in the education technology field. Regardless of all of his activities and accomplishments, he will quickly tell you, and I know this to be very true, that the most important job and the greatest blessing in his life is serving as Julia's husband and his father to Alexandra, Richard, Marcus, or Mo, and Max. Please give a warm welcome to my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark David Milliron.
Thanks so much, Darcy. And it's so good to be here to help catalyze this conversation around digital teaching, especially given the moment that we're all in. It's an interesting time. And as we're entering the beginning of the middle and thinking about where we're going to take this world of education forward as a continuing difference maker, the conversation I'm hoping to catalyze today is around this notion of how do we meet this moment? How do we make the road ahead better than the one behind? And what I'm hoping to do in this conversation is to provide some resources for you. I'm a big believer in leave behind. So we're going to make the PDF available of the presentation. It is linked out to all kinds of resources. I've been taught by many students that many people who use PowerPoint have no power nor a point. So I'm going to be very careful to make sure that this is a resource for you. I want you to be able to read the research. I want you to be able to get to the case studies. I want you to be able to start these conversations in your own K-12, community college, university, tertiary, post-secondary, whatever model you're in. The world of education needs these kinds of conversations going on. And given what we've been wrestling with, what I'd like to kind of offer is a way of approaching this, and then I want to talk about the framework for today. First is, I'm a huge fan of Hans Rosling. He passed away recently. His kids are kind of carrying on his legacy. If you've ever seen any of Hans Rosling's videos, he's amazing in his ability to use data visualization to kind of showcase how things have changed and will change. He was a real believer in how data could be used to kind of drive positive change. But this book, Factfulness, was in many ways kind of his, in some ways, his powerful swan song. And one of the things he said in it is he doesn't want to be called an optimist, even though he is optimistic about what the road ahead could look like. He said that sounds almost frivolous. Like in his mind, he wanted to be called a possibilist, somebody who looks at data and feels strongly that based on the data, we can make substantive change. And I just love that notion. And I think as we enter the beginning of the middle and think about post-pandemic, we want to be possibilists. We want to be people who are taking a hard look at what's working, what's not, understanding what we've learned in the last year and thinking about how we're driving forward. And a good example of this, if you look at the work, for example, of the poverty initiatives, Jeffrey Sachs, who was at the Earth Institute in Columbia, who wrote the powerful book, The End of Poverty, made the case back in 2004 that we could literally bring, his whole idea is we could eliminate extreme poverty in the world if we just brought real focused effort to it. And if you've seen the data around this, basically in the early 1800s, the vast majority of the world lived in poverty, and often extreme poverty. And as we went through the Industrial Revolution, those numbers came down significantly. And we got to the place in the early 2000s where we were in the 30 to 40% range. And people were feeling like, oh, we've kind of accomplished something. And Jeffrey Sachs and a group of people from all around the world basically said, no, this is nowhere near enough. We can bring this number almost down to zero. We definitely can bring it into single digits. People thought they were crazy. People said, there's no way that can happen. And a lot of really kind of racist and painful stuff was said about people from all around the world. And they said, no, that's not true. Actually, with a combination of debt forgiveness, strategic health initiatives, economic development, we can absolutely change the game with poverty. And you can see from this kind of basic chart that what they did in the course of work from 2004 until now is they've literally brought extreme poverty around the world into single digits. What they showed was that using the data with some really focused large-scale innovation and scale-based strategies, you can change the game. Well, we're in that kind of moment right now in the world of education. We're living in the world of what I call clickbait catastrophe, where every story we're reading is saying that based on the pandemic and what we're facing right now in the world of education, that we're falling off the cliff, that there's no way we're going to get better, that we're going to lose 20 years of gains, that suddenly we're going to have all kinds of challenges. And I'm really persuaded by the people who say it's not about learning loss. We've actually had a different kind of learning for this generation of students. There are things that they will take away that they probably can use for an entire generation in terms of their ability to kind of transcend. And one of the things we're thinking right now is, how do we meet this moment? How do we actually step forward and make the shift for larger post-secondary, for K-12 in the world of education? What can we do to overcome the clickbait catastrophe, the people who are saying the world is going to fall because of this? I'm going to argue that the work we do to meet this moment together is going to mean more, and especially in the coming months, because we're going to be setting the structure for how the next 2 or 3 years come together. And what I'd like to do is offer a few ideas. I was asked to be a part of a group that was the editorial core for the journal Change, and we did an addition of change all around this notion of meeting the moment, around social justice and the pandemic issues. Powerful research pieces in there from Arizona State, from the Hope Center with Sarah Goldrick-Rab, from Wynn Rosser from the Temple Foundation around digital divide. Just unbelievable set of resources for you. This will link you out to that change edition. But building on that, and often the work we're doing at Western Governors University, we work with around 2,600 school districts around the country with our demonstration teaching sites and our preclinical experiences. So we're really in the field, and obviously the work we're doing in post-secondary as well. Based on this kind of family of work, I'm going to offer a couple of conversation sets that hopefully you can use in your own context. I'm going to basically offer two frameworks and a job, right? The first framework is around how we can lean into the idea of using these digital architectures at our disposal to really connect students to the best content, context, and community. How then, based on the digital footprints that come out of that content, context, community engagement, that we can leverage data science, design thinking, and domain expertise to really make the pathway through post-secondary a pathway to possibilities. And then finally, I'm going to give you some innovators to case. And case is my wonderful term. I stole it from a teacher in a study we did of about 2,000 Teaching Excellence Award winners. And as a part of that study, we did a series of focus groups. And in one of the focus groups, I had a teacher who came up to me and said, "You realize the best of teachers are purveyors of the CASE method." I said, "CASE, what do you like?" And he goes, "CASE stands for copy and steal everything." Like when other people are doing it well, we want to use it too. So I want to give you some CASE strategies as you're kind of looking at the again, meeting this moment kind of going forward. So let's jump in. Let's look first at this notion of content, context, and community. A few years back, I wrote an article for the Chronicle of Higher Education called "Time to End the Family Feud," where I was trying to make the case that the kind of facile and faulty argument of what's better online or on ground is actually false, that the teacher effect is so large, that the instructional design imperative is so important that it doesn't really matter the modality. What matters is the instructional strategy sound? Are the people meeting the modality in the right way for the right reasons? And is it put together, that learning experience put together in the right way? And one of the core conversations for us as educators is to think, how do we bring the best of all these worlds together and use all the tools at our disposal? Part of the metaphor I use is how to use all the arrows in our quiver to hit the apple. And I still feel strongly about that we have face-to-face infrastructure resources that we're going to start leveraging again post-pandemic. But now we've had a forced orientation into a deeper experience of our digital architectures, whether it's our Zoom, Teams, Google Hangouts, all the way through our learning management systems, our content repositories, all the work we've been doing in the digital space. And this, in the challenge in this, and I know you'll get this, is a lot of people have conflated the emergency remote learning experience, especially from the spring of last year, with high quality online learning. And there are people who've been at this for 20 plus years, the Western Governors of the world. Blackboard's been at this in terms of enabling it for a long time, for decades. You've got big folks out there, ASU, University of Central Florida, a host of folks, and then internationally, the open universities have been going at this. And you would think that their work had never happened, and people began conflating the emergency remote learning with online learning, not realizing that's the equivalent of equating a life raft with a luxury liner. The truth is, there's a bunch we can learn from the people who've been at this for 20 plus years. The online learning consortiums out there, the folks from WICHE, the folks from WCET, who've really, in EDUCAUSE, who've been at this for a long time, especially the ELI, the EDUCAUSE Learning Initiative. And the idea is for us to kind of combine that expertise from the folks who've been at it for a long time with the lived experience of really powerful innovators who've been having to use this digital experience and have become really creative. And so one of the things I'm really compelled by is that we can now think about how do we leverage this infrastructure strategically. And this, I love this framework. I stole this from Kay Patricia Cross, who was from Berkeley, who did a piece for the League for Innovation about brain research. And one of the things she showed is that learning in the brain, if you look at brain research and learning is always about making connections. And one of the simplest frameworks she talked about, this notion of helping students make connections to content, making them make connections to context, the use and the application of their learning, and to community, to each other, to their faculty members, to the world of the profession outside. And one of the things I love is this idea of challenging ourselves. are we using this digital infrastructure to connect students to the best content possible so that they're actually getting the best content at the moment they need it, when they need it? Are we connecting them to the best context possible where they can get relevance, application, utility, and the learning can come to life, where they can do project-based learning, where they can do group-based learning? Are we connecting them to community, to each other, to the faculty members in deeper ways, to a learning world outside of our education experiences? I love this framework because it gives people who are in the education world a to-do list, right? Are we thinking this full spectrum connection strategy? And I would argue we were already beginning to do some broader good work in this as we entered the pandemic, but a couple of areas are coming to the fore as we come out of the pandemic that we need to think about as educators is, in addition to this core infrastructure, we're going to have to get a lot better at mobile. One of the things we found in the pandemic in particular is that the leveraging of mobile devices has been incredibly useful. I mean, I was talking to folks last night at a dinner here in Seattle about the idea that going to the DMV is a totally different experience now. While I might have loved going to the DMV and spending 4 hours sitting in a room full of people and never, wondering when I was ever going to get served, today, going to the DMV is an appointment. You sit in the parking lot, you get a ping on your mobile phone, you go stand in line for 3 minutes, you go in, you get your thing taken care of, and you leave. I've never had a DMV experience in 30 plus years that was anything like that, and I don't ever want it to go back. And yeah, that's a service operation. I get that's different than learning, but there are a lot of service operations in the educational experience that we have to think about with our students. But there are also accessing of content and resources. And I can tell you right now that a lot of the people who are thinking about their digital learning are all too often thinking about laptops and PCs. They're not thinking about mobile. And what we know is that the vast majority of our learning experiences, especially with younger folks, are experienced on mobile devices. And the question is, are they accessible on mobile devices, especially if they have any kind of challenges? Or, and again, just how do they look? Are they mobile responsive? Can you connect? And what we know right now is that we're if you look at the kind of national data, we're getting a C or worse in our mobile accessibility. So it's a challenge for us. I think one of the things we're going to have to think about is how do we connect learners to this kind of, again, content, context, and community, leveraging mobile devices in a way. Good example, Chris Dede from Harvard has a wonderful thing in one of his kind of augmented reality initiatives where he has middle school students going around to campus leveraging mobile devices to find data from an environmental challenge around there, and using the mobile devices to actually conduct experiments to actually try to solve the problem. Love it. The idea of interactive learning, leveraging the mobile devices. Had an English teacher talk about the idea that she actually uses podcast audio files to actually walk students through the editing of their papers. She no longer writes out the edits. She literally talks them through. So when she gets the draft paper, she'll tell them, really like this opening paragraph, great use of imagery. You have kind of a mixed metaphor in this first part, really work on that forecast, but all of her edits that she normally would write, she puts in the kind of podcast format so they can deliver it and use it in the mobile device, and they can sit at their kitchen table or in the coffee shop and edit their paper. And one of the students had a great line, said, "It feels like you're over my shoulder helping me the entire time." Love it. Again, the idea for us is thinking about how we're going to leverage mobile and in addition to mobile, where we have other things coming our way. I love the fact that, in my early days in kind of championing the idea of leveraging digital resources, one of our key jobs was getting faculty in the early 1990s okay with using email. Then it was getting okay with using the internet. Then it was getting them okay with using learning management systems. And what you always saw is there were some rock stars who just leaned in hard and fast and really gets them. And other folks, you had to prove it to them over time. And once you proved it was useful, they would begin to use it. And we've done that with a series after series of different infrastructures. We're now starting to do that with mobile, but get ready because augmented and virtual reality is our next frontier. We will be talking about this as regular and every day within the next 5 to 10 years. People are already using this. I was at Lone Star College a few months ago, and they're using Oculus Quest to teach anatomy and physiology. So you can have basically kind of a hologram of the heart out, and the haptic gloves, and they're touching and feeling. It's just crazy how this can actually change it. And I would tell you, as an educator, if you haven't done a good VR AR simulation, and I don't want this to sound too harsh, but I want to make sure it's clear about this. If you don't do it soon, it's almost educational malpractice. This is going to be a very powerful resource for our students, and there's some simple things to look at. You can, especially the Oculus libraries are really strong with a lot of different resources you can look at, and you can really bring this to life. When you're trying to teach anatomy, physiology, having a three-dimensional experience is totally different. When you're teaching geography, when you're teaching, even when you're trying to teach history, this stuff can come to life. And again, it's context, relevance, application, utility. You not only can get them to great content, you can get them to context. This is what it looks like in practice. And what I love about this idea is the idea of if you're kind of diving deep in learning, you're going to allow this to kind of come together. We've been leveraging something at WGU that we love called Immersion. Immersion is a virtual reality simulator, and what we use it for is our teachers have to get experience in DEI situations. They have to get experience in especially special education experiences. Now, often they can touch and feel that as a part of their clinical experiences in classrooms around the country, and we do that. We have the largest clinical experience program in the United States. We have people in classrooms, but this actually gives them a safe place to fail in these and actually learn. So we have these VR simulations we put together where we have literally a DEI incident come up and they have to go in and handle that kind of racial social justice blow up in the classroom. We want to see what the teachers do. We have a VR incident where they have to recognize dyslexia and they have to respond to it. But you get the idea. Is like we're trying to let them have face challenges that they're going to maybe have to deal with as a professional, but they're experiencing it in a place where they can fail and have feedback, which is, again, really useful for them. Content, context, community. You really get it. I'm also pretty compelled by this notion of peering. I've been doing work with a company called NearPeer that is doing really kind of neat work in matching students with each other, where the idea that it get beyond the social networks where they're matching based on their learning excitements and the kind of things that they're really interested in. And this kind of near-peer work, I think, is very compelling. I've done a lot of martial arts, and one of the things in martial arts is the notion of peering is powerful. You train with somebody who's at your level, and then you try to always have somebody who's above you as a peer who can really push you. And then once you get to a certain level, it's service learning. You want to give back to somebody who's coming up behind you. That 3-level peering is going to be powerful. And again, that's part of that community piece. Content, context, community. You get the framework. And the idea for us is thinking about how we pull all of this together. All the while, by the way, I wrote another piece for EDUCAUSE that was an open letter to students a number of years ago, and when I was at the Gates Foundation. And in this letter, basically made the argument in this letter to students that we are spending billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of hours trying to create richer, deeper learning experiences for students, but in the world of technology. But none of it will matter. Literally none of it will matter if our students don't do the work of showing up with purpose, engagement, tenacity, grit. Like, they have to take their responsibility for this. So if we can figure out how we kind of challenge them to meet this moment as well, this is about both of us stepping up to the challenge at the same time and making sure we're kind of challenging that across the board. So that's one framework. Second framework I'd love for you to think about is the fact that as we use more digital tools, and George Siemens is probably the best person talking about this, and he's a big player in the learning analytics world. And in fact, he was one of the early inventors of MOOCs, and he's been doing deep learning analytics work at University of Texas, at Arlington, before that Athabasca, but really driving this work internationally. But one of the things he talks about is everything we've just talked about creates digital signal, and that digital signal they're basically footprints. And when you put those footprints together, they tell stories of the journeys our students have been on. And what we want to be is we want to make sure we're paying attention. And by the way, we've been using data in education for centuries. It's not just this new digital tools. The earliest data acquisition are instructors who get to know their students, and they're using data processing using this amazing computer called our brain. We're taking all kinds of data streams in, whether it's formative and summative assessments, whether it's body language, whether it's paralinguistic, whether it's eye contact. That's all data, and that data is processed, and then we adjust our instruction based on the data. Same thing now. We have new streams of data coming in. We have to have hard conversations about the ethical, appropriate, timely use of that data. But people are really beginning to do work. And I'd love for you to check out this article about catalyzing cultures of care and innovation through prescriptive analytics. It's this idea of let's see what's working and what's not. Let's use the data to understand here are the momentum points for our students, here are the loss points in the holistic journey, and what can we do to better understand what works for whom and in what way. Again, it's building the right infrastructure to get the right data to the right people in the right way, and it's a good part of our larger conversation. So as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic and thinking about the digital infrastructures, if we can architect the data infrastructure the right way, we'll be able to answer questions and actually try, tune, and test. Let me say that again. Try, tune, and test. I'm a big believer that if we have an infrastructure where we can try, tune, and test, we can collectively be kind of learning success scientists, right? Where we can see what works and for whom and in what way. By the way, a lot of this is about democratizing the data. I'm a big fan of what they've done with the MyChart initiatives. The early medical world, and when they started, looking at electronic medical records and started figuring out that, hey, if you get the data out to the patients, especially if they have chronic syndromes, and they can actually monitor their own data, they will make good, healthy choices. And the MyChart initiative at Cleveland Clinic took off, and people were really panicked about whether or not that would have the impact, but they democratized the data. They got that data out for the patients. And what they found when they did it was that the patients, especially folks with things like diabetes, things with Addison's disease, having those data helped them make better choices about their diet, about their sleep, about a whole host of things. They democratized the data. I would argue in the world of education that we have been using data primarily for accountability. We've been getting it to legislators, to trustees, to administrators. The real ripe area for us is to take that content, context, community, digital architecture data stream and pull it in and not use it for all this accountability stuff. Now, I get we're going to need to do accountability work for all kinds of reasons, but we need to get it to the professionals who are working in the education space. And what that's going to mean is really thinking through the way we get the data to faculty, to the students themselves, to the advisors. And I think, the Fitbit's a wonderful example because they're constantly tuning this. Fitbit's hilarious because I had a friend of mine the other day who was in a really bad mood. And I'm like, Bob, what is going on? He goes, oh, my Fitbit ran out of power last night. I didn't get my sleep data. Like, he was that mad because he's so used to having his sleep data every day. And again, you get used to getting this data on a regular basis. People are doing challenges with each other and all the rest. This is UX design. This is user interface design. This means we have to take data science, combine it with our design thinking, and then figure out how we bring our domain expertise together in a way where we can actually shape it. Simple framework for you to think about. I love this kind of learning leaders matrix. If you think about your ability to use data and apply it, so from basic data reporting up through predictive modeling, and then your ability to change, right? There's some organizations that don't want to change at all and others that are unbelievably good. Like, there are some people who only do data work because they have to, some institutions that only do data work because they have to, and they really can't change very much. In fact, a friend of mine who's in the world of IR jokingly used to say that they are a very data-driven organization. And I thought that was kind of funny because I knew their institution. And she goes, our president makes a decision and drives us to find data to back up the decision he's already made. So that's not where you want to be. You also don't want to be in the analysis paralysis side where you get phenomenal data, but you don't act on it. You can't try, you can't test. You also don't want to be in best practices and where you're using other people's data to jump to conclusions about your own students, because what we know is that different institutions and different contexts with different students have different data flow, and there are some different things you need to do. It's this upper right-hand quadrant where we're going to get more data from these digital streams. We're going to get better at changing around it. But I'm a big believer that this upper right quadrant is not necessarily about the administrators. This is about the learning leaders who are willing to lean into this, including students, but especially faculty members and especially the advisors who are able to look at this data and understand what's working in what way and for whom, and especially able to wrestle with the ethical kind of implications of this larger work and think about what that's going to mean for them. So, by the way, a couple of really good books to read around this is I love Todd Rose. He's I jokingly call him my favorite high school dropout Harvard professor. He has this wonderful book called The End of Average, where he really talks about the challenge of the analytics movement that has risen around what he calls averagitarianism, where we're using data based on everybody, but relevant to no one person. So not many of us have 2.3 kids, right? It's the idea that as human beings, we're jagged, and averages tend to smooth out edges, and that what you want to make sure is you're using data in a way where you can personalize for that person in the right way. Phenomenal book, great read, absolutely worth taking a look at. The other book I always tell educators to check out is the book Range. I love Range because David Epstein really takes on the 10,000 hour rule myth, where he basically says, yeah, 10,000 hours of practice might work in simple domains, in domains that are defined. But in complex domains like healthcare and the world of education, you need range. And range is actually the ability to learn a lot of things from a lot of different sectors, really understand analogies that can cross sectors, and then pull that together in a way. And one of the things you find is the best musicians in the world are often trained in multiple musical instruments. The best athletes in the world don't begin specializing when they're 5. They actually don't specialize until much later in life. They play a whole bunch of different sports and they're able to cross it over by the end. If you love liberal arts, if you love the notion of kind of ecumenical thinking and then synthesizing and bring it together, this is worth the read, because it just really has the stories in here to really make the point that this idea that if you can pull from different resources, you can do slow learning, you can do deep learning, you can bring cross-sector learning. But this is where I want to bring in domain expertise, because one of the things that comes out of this book, and Karen Stout and myself she's from Achieving the Dream, we've done a number of webinars on this notion of the 3D leadership, which is basically design thinking, is data science, design thinking, and domain expertise. You need the domain expertise to guide the design thinking and the data science. And by the way, that design thinking is really important because it's going to make us think through the way we're structuring things and pulling them together. Let me give you a concrete example of that. In the world of medicine, one of the things we know is that the MRI has been really powerful. I'm going to zoom ahead real quick because I'm going to use this example first and then we'll come back. So this is the MRI. Some of you, have you seen the MRI? Some of you experienced the MRI. I had not really had an MRI up until about 3 years ago. I had seen the show House, so I kind of knew that they existed, and I'd done a lot of work in healthcare, so I obviously understood what the MRI was and what it could do. Didn't have a personal experience with it until I tore my shoulder lifting weights with my son. Got a little too froggy one afternoon. Next thing you know, I had a torn shoulder. Couldn't even sleep on it. Went in to talk to the doctor. The doctor scoped it, did a bunch of other stuff. He said, "You have old man shoulder." I'm like, "Is that a thing?" He goes, "Yeah," but he goes, "We need to." He goes, "I think I know what's going on, but I need to do an MRI so I can make sure. I think you have a couple tears." So I went down to the ARA, which is a radiology center in Austin, and walked in. And the guy who was there was actually somebody I played basketball with at the local YMCA. And so he's like, "Hey, Mark, what's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, what's going on?" So I'm coming in, getting ready to get on the slab and go into it. And he goes, "Oh," he goes, "You're not claustrophobic, are you?" I'm like, "I don't think I'm claustrophobic." And he goes, "Okay, good." He goes, "A lot of people, when they get in here, it's unbelievable. They just can't take it. I give them this button, and they if they push it, we have to stop and redo the entire thing. So thank God you're not going to be claustrophobic." I'm like, "Oh, great. We're starting with shame." I'm like, "I'm not sure this is going to be a good thing." He goes, "This is no big deal." And he kind of puts me down on the slab, and we start going back. He goes, "It really we'll be through this in no time." And as it's going back, I look backwards at the hole, and he looks at the hole, and then we kind of look at each other, and we both look at the hole as I'm going into the hole, by the way, and we realize I'm not going to fit in the hole. I'm 6'4", 250. And he goes, "Oh," he goes, "You might have to scoosh your other shoulder over." I'm like, "Scoosh?" And he literally grabs my shoulder and pushes that one over. And I'm like this, and he puts me into the hole. And it's going up. I'm beginning to panic. But then I think to myself, "Oh, well, it's just my shoulder. It's only going to go up to my waist maybe, and I can pull myself out. No big deal." No, 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 no. They went all the way up to my ankles in this machine. The thing is this far from my face, a little blue line. My heart is pounding like crazy. Like I didn't know I was going to be in that situation. And then my buddy goes, he goes, don't worry. He goes, this doesn't take very long at all. It's only like 35 minutes. I'm like, 35 minutes? Like, there's no way. He goes, and he goes, oh, and by the way, you might hear some clicking and popping. And then he leaves. And my heart is pounding. I mean, coming out of my chest. And again, I've done a lot of martial arts, really into meditation. I start calming myself down, get myself to a better place, calm my biorhythms down. And sure enough, right then the clicking and popping starts. And for those of you who know MRI, you know the wonderful clicking and popping. It's not clicking and popping. It's like, like the entire time. So my heart's going crazy again, and I'm just freaking out. And I'm just thinking to myself, other people have done this, you can do it. Other people have done it, you can do it. I'm just trying to get to the other side. I'm thinking we're almost done. And the guy gets on the speaker and he goes, I'm thinking, okay, we've been in here a half hour. This has to be over. And he goes, okay, you're 5 minutes in. 5 minutes? No. Whole 30 minutes goes by. And finally it's like, ooh, we start going out of the MRI. Slowest birthing process ever. Ooh, we go out. I think I ran to my car naked. I just wanted out of there as fast as I could. And I called a friend of mine who's a doc, and I said, Bill, what is going on with the MRI? And he goes, Mark, you have no idea how common the experience you just had is. He goes, and in fact, he goes, a significant portion of folks have to be sedated before they do an MRI, and we can't knock them out completely. We have to just knock them out enough to control them by voice. He goes, and what's challenging about this, he goes, it's way worse for kids. He goes, because not only does it fail all the time because the button gets pushed, and we have to get an anesthesiologist in there, there's a significant number of kids that have to go to claustrophobia counseling afterwards. Just terrifying. Now, I bring up this example because there is no way that the researchers and designers who built the MRI designed it as a torture chamber. No, they designed it to save lives. These were advanced researchers and docs who were trying to get the best pictures possible to save people's lives, to treat chronic diseases, to treat diseases that were going to kill people. It was supposed to do good. The challenge was it wasn't designed with the patient experience in mind. It was designed for the purpose of getting the best possible pictures. Now, if they have designed it with the patient experience in mind, I hope you're getting the metaphor here about student experience. If you design it with the patient experience in mind, along with all that expertise to get the best picture, you can suddenly get a much better experience. In fact, you can bring the failure rates way down and the success rates way up. So that's what they did. And this will click you out to an article where GE and IDEO came together and they redesigned the MRI specifically aimed at kids. They had the Buzz Lightyear version. This was the pirate ship that was wildly popular. They used a combination of open MRI technology combined with VR headsets where they went on a pirate journey. Almost no failure rates with this, no need to sedate, absolutely no need for claustrophobia counseling. If you were afraid of pirates, it was really a problem. But the biggest problem with this is like this was only for kids, and the adults would go by the kids' room and they're like, I want to be a pirate. I don't want to do this, but you get it. The idea here, and I want to come back to something this is real learning for us at Western Governors and a host of other places, is there are times when we talk about our learning programs, our degree programs, our certificate programs, our whether you're talking about high school diplomas or college degrees, our programs for our students, and we think about our programs as collections of classes and curriculum. Let me say that again. We often think first about our programs as collections of courses and curricula. And when we do that, we're using our expertise to get the best curriculum possible and sometimes the best technology to get that curriculum, but the courses and the curricula, when in fact, what our programs actually are, our programs are not courses and curricula put in a concrete sequence. Our programs are a family of experiences that happen to include courses and curricula. The experiences begin with how you brought in with an enrollment counselor, who your original mentors are, your beginning faculty, all the interactions with evaluators along the way, all the way through to the point you graduate. It's a family of experiences that includes classes and curricula. And when you think that way, you suddenly start thinking about co-curricular activities, peering, connections, much broader. That's why I bring up this idea of data science, using data science, design thinking, and domain expertise. As we're coming out of this pandemic, we have the opportunity to think about how we leverage this digital architecture, but how we use these data to come together in a way where we can start thinking about that student experience. And what we know is that first generation low income students from all around the world have significantly have significantly more challenges in the higher ed space for a whole host of reasons. We can begin to design for that and try to get better at trying to help more and more diverse students be more successful than ever before. And that's where, like, I want you to like really pay attention to the innovators you want to case. So, for example, at Western Governors University, this work we've been doing right now about our holistic program design, we have really thought about how we bring, and we have a specialty faculty model where we have program mentors, course instructors, evaluators that focus on their specialty, but then integrate that experience for the student. And the idea is to allow the student using competency-based learning to accelerate. And what's great is we're able, we're pretty ecumenical. We use all kinds of technologies. You heard about the Immersion earlier. We partner with Blackboard. Blackboard's been a great partner with especially our health college. The idea for us is we put that technology to use to try to help that student, especially first generation, low income, diverse students. About 75% of our students are underserved. We want them to be radically successful, and we're trying to design for that student experience in a holistic way. So take some time and learn from some folks who are doing some of this work, leveraging both the technology for the 3Cs and for the 3Ds. In addition to WGU, somebody else to look at, somebody like the Mastery Transcript Consortium. The Mastery Transcript Consortium is a fascinating group. It's about 350 institutions, all K-12, and they are about a third public, two-thirds private. They are totally focused on this idea that our transcripts, the grade-based transcript, is radically reductive. It actually constricts innovation in the world of education, and it's not really the best of authentic assessment. So one of the things they've said is if they could break the tyranny of the transcript and actually move towards more of a learning map for our students, and actually have elite colleges accept that, right? That having that kind of mastery transcript, they're using mastery-based learning, competency-based learning, and then mapping that towards different kinds of outcomes. One, you get the ceiling effect out of the way for those students who are really high flyers, but you also have much more kind of integrated and fulsome learning. Really fascinating work, and they're leveraging the digital architectures we have at our disposal to get into much more deep and integrative learning. It is absolutely worth taking a look at some of the work they've done. I'm very compelled by this, especially because it's going to hopefully get us away from the kind of overuse of standardized high stakes testing, the notion of more ongoing formative developmental, and especially focusing on this. We say this at Western Governors all the time. Our evaluation and learning growth model is based on grace, not on justice. If you're about grades, you tend to be about justice, like this is what they deserve for X, Y, and Z, as opposed to, hey, let's not make the student take the test when they're not ready. Let's get them to the point that they're ready. When they say they're ready, boom, let's let them take the test. That's doing a model based on grace as opposed to based on justice. It just helps us rethink. You can't do that if you're focused on the transcripts, the grades, and kind of that model. So it's worth looking at what they're doing and how they're rethinking. I love that kind of rethinking term because that's been a really big deal for them. GOA, the Global Online Academy, has done the same kind of thing. It's a big global consortium with schools from all around the world who've been learning together on this work. They've really leaned into competency-based learning, but they have really focused on this notion of rethinking learning, rethinking assessment. By the way, if you're not a fan of Adam Grant and the whole notion of think again, check out his books. It's fantastic. But it's this idea of, can we begin to unbundle and think about our learning in kind of new and compelling ways? I love the work of OER Commons and ISKME. OER Commons stands for Open Education Resource Commons. And this is a digital library of curricular resources from all over the world. And they're leveraging these resources to connect students with the best content humanly possible. And what's really kind of powerful about the work they're doing at OER Commons is the idea that you can begin these conversations with educators from all around the world, and you're not focused just on publishers bringing you content. You're taking the expertise from people all over the place. Again, great educators have always used CASE, and this is the idea of creating a digital architecture for that, but especially allowing them to kind of manage the mashup and the kind of reconnection and kind of reuse of these larger things. I'm also a big fan of what George Siemens and the folks have been doing at the Link Lab at UT Arlington, and they're really focusing on how we can use digital infrastructures to be able to think through the affective domain. How are students feeling about learning? Very compelled by that. And one of the things that they're trying to look at is how you can leverage emotional analysis to help us make sure we're surfacing data, we're surfacing information to students in a way that helps them understand things in a deeper and richer way? Can we look at an emotive response and actually understand, hey, this student's lost. Let's get them better infrastructure, better information right in that moment. And some of the work he's done is around this idea of like being able to make sure you check that emotional response and get the right resources to them. Candace Teal was doing this for a long time. That's the Open Learning Initiative at Stanford. Now she's doing some work with Amazon around this. But her work, Candace Teal was really doing this work around using human learning science to tune digital learning. Very compelled by this idea. I think we in the world of education, especially as we're coming post-pandemic and we've had a deeper dive into digital technologies, and we really think through how we can connect students to the best content, context, community, leverage our data science, design thinking, and domain expertise for these learning experiences, we need to have a discipline of using human learning science to tune this and get better and better at trying to help more and more diverse students learn. We have a lot of one-size-fits-allism in digital infrastructure. We've got to think about how do we personalize and how do we kind of optimize the infrastructure we're moving for. This one is really important. Our data at Civitas, when I was at Civitas Learning, one of the things we found is that the vast majority of universities that we did a study of 4 million students. The vast majority of it was about 70 institutions. And one of the things we found is if you looked across multiple years, again, millions of students, the vast majority, in fact, all the institutions except for one, were losing more students above 2.0 than below. And in fact, over 50% of the students who left were between 3.0, or around 50% were between 3.0 and 4.0 students, meaning they were academically fine. The challenges and why they were leaving their post-secondary pathways generally focused around a combination of basic needs, or life and what I call life and logistics, or psychosocial issues. And if you think about those big three, academic, psychosocial, life, and logistics, we have an innovation and design challenge for us in the world of digital. And I love the folks at the Hope Center, which is at Temple University. McRab is really the champion of this. They really have shined a bright light on the fact that we need to innovate around basic needs. How do we braid our social infrastructure within our institution, around our institutions, to help our students make sure they get the best resources possible? Because many times our students are leaving their academic journeys not because they have a problem academically. They're having problems academically because they have no food. Because they are in insecure life situations, because they're in violent home life, or because they're housing insecure, whatever it might be. And the data from the Hope Center has made it clear that if we don't innovate against this, it doesn't matter how great our curriculum is. We can design the most compelling program in the world. If we don't manage to do work around basic needs innovation combined with psychosocial, which means we have an entire generation of people who've been told they don't belong in college. What can we do to help make a move in that? And these are really intersecting Venn diagrams. We get it. There's work we have to do with basic needs, combined the work we have to do with psychosocial, combined with academic. That's when you really can get some momentum. So it's worth checking out the kind of work they're doing and the innovators who are really kind of driving work in that kind of space. So bringing this together, we can meet this moment together. We have an opportunity right now to actually begin some deep rethinking of the education world. We can come together and really think through how we continue to expand the connection of students to content, context, and community, leveraging an expanding digital footprint. We can get a lot smarter about how we use data science, our domain expertise, but especially lean into design thinking. By the way, one of my favorite things about design thinking, if you haven't spent much time in that area, is that it begins with empathy. You focus on the empathy for the students that you're trying to serve. And then once you get that empathy, you get clear about the problem definition and you ideate around the solutions and then try and test and tune as you go. But you begin with that deep understanding. That deep understanding helps us understand things like basic needs, things like psychosocial issues, things like the curricular connections in kind of more compelling ways, which I love. But also always just being willing to kind of look and learn from the folks that are out there. That means, by the way, events like this really matter. Communities of practice coming together around this and getting away from these facile arguments, what's better, online or on ground. That's not the argument to have. The argument is how we as educators can use the tools at our disposal to help deeper and better learning happen, to help more and more diverse students be more successful than ever before. Final idea, before we bring Darcy back on to kick me out. During the pandemic, one of the interesting things is my entire family kind of came back together. I have 4 kids, as Darcy brought out. But my daughter, who's a rising educator at UT Austin, was with our family again. She's 22, and she was with us for the entire year. We decided to write a book together, and we wrote a children's book called The Sugar Chair. And what The Sugar Chair is about, the idea came from a kindergarten teacher that we knew in our early days as parents, and we actually used the Sugar Chair with Alex. But the Sugar Chair is, instead of timeout, the Sugar Chair is a kind of a white chair that kids will sit in, and the rhythm is slow down, look around, figure out how to sweeten things up. And the whole idea is, instead of going into timeout, you give them something to do. And the idea is you actually train the process of introspection, slowing the world down, empathy and understanding of other people within the situation. Slow down, look around, look at other people, look through their eyes and understand it, figure out how to sweeten things up. You get your plan about how you're going to pull together. The idea here was trying to help just kind of get kids into this conversation around this. By the way, we as adults need sugar chairs. My sugar chair is a deck outside my house. And the idea that we're trying to lean into is trying to get people to slow down and plan for the future. I'm going to argue that in the world of education, this has been a hard and often horrific year for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who think this is undeserved and kind of a brutal punishment. All that notwithstanding, we have a moment right now to slow down, to look around at what we did, what our colleagues have done, what we can learn, and figure out how we can make this better, how we can make it radically better for the folks that are coming ahead, and it is worth every bit of our effort. Thanks, everybody. Darcy, I'll let you come back in.
Thank you, Mark. As usual, it's such a great set of messages for everyone on this call. Educators, I know everyone is taking notes and ready to get the PDF so they can follow the resources that you've added. I know you lost me at the MRI. I am one of those people that has to be completely drugged, and that's to go into the quote unquote open MRI, which
open MRI,
no more open than anything. I mean, it is not open. It's this flat thing over you. And all I remember the time I did it was my husband, after I cried the first time trying to do it, when I did get the drug so that I could kind of be half out of it, he said I was under there singing to the music and everything else. So I managed to get through it, but very, very claustrophobic. I have one quick question for you. I love the focus on the students and what we should be doing for the students. And I totally agree with all of that. And I'd like to know, when we think about the faculty and the fatigue and the stress and everything they've gone through, what advice would you give to the institutional leaders who are in this symposium right now of they should be doing to encourage and help their faculty adjust to the new normal as much as we're helping the students and making education accessible? What could they do?
Yeah, I think I would say 3 things. I think one is be deeply aware of the challenge of emotional contagion. Emotional contagion is often caregiving functions and service functions like nurses and teachers are right there at the front lines, or people are dealing with really hard stuff, and they're soaking up a lot of emotional challenges for people who've gone through the pandemic, whether it's kids or adults. And one of the things we've seen even in our college is just the challenges around that. We dove deep into the notion of social emotional learning, and really the idea was more of it to actually help ourselves and think about it, but understand that emotional contagion is real and that people need some space between the notes. So that is the first thing. The second thing is you've got to put that empathy to work in some ways, which is begin to think about faculty experience and a support experience as well. How can they do great work in the great way? Because what's pretty clear is that more is not necessarily better. Sometimes it's thinking about how we can do less in a better way. And I think that's going to be an important thing for us to think about coming out of this. How we create academic environments where people are doing great work in a great way, and and then I think third is I think we have to be willing to again look at the data and share the data and understand what's working and what's not, and then kind of learn together about how we can make this better on the road ahead. And I would argue, though, that's a hard conversation, Darcy. I know you get that. Is really listening to what's working and what's not for different students, and not explaining it away, right? Just saying, hey, this is where hearing what students are saying, hearing what faculty and advisors are saying, and then figuring out how you can tune that going forward. There's none of that's easy, but it does mean, especially for leaders, we know you're eager, you're ready to get into the fall full blast. Take a beat, right? Take a beat and understand the folks on the front lines have been through a lot right now, and we've got to figure out a way for them to come together. Concrete example, we have a mentor model where our mentors work directly one-on-one with students, and we're literally from the starting line to the finish line, you have a relationship with a mentor. One of the things we piloted this year is doing team mentors, where you have 2 mentors with a caseload. And we did that because we realized during the pandemic, it was so much pressure for that single mentor with their mentees. If they needed a break, if they needed self-care, they didn't feel they had the time. They could go take a week off because they were about to go crazy. By pairing them, they could backstop each other, right? And that's a design where they were able to go through. And so far, it's been a really, really positive kind of model. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Listen, design, figure out where you want to go.
Great. And because I know that I have a lot of faculty who have been teaching remotely and online for a while, but all of those that were new to this and all the pressures, and for the mentors and facilitators and coaches, and just a whole ecosystem of unexpected stress.
Yeah.
I think over this year. Well, Mark, on behalf of the Blackboard team and on behalf of the 5,000 people who are involved in this symposium as attendees, I want to thank you so much for your time and your messages. They always resonate with me, and I know they resonate with everyone who's listening. So thank you again so much. Very appreciative of you being with us. For everyone else, you'll be able to download Mark's PDF, so you'll have his slides. You can find him fairly easily in multiple ways.
Quite at Mark Milliron. It's very easy on Twitter.
Very, very easy. And feel free to reach out to him if you have other things you want to talk about. We will have our next set of sessions starting at the top of the hour. So you've got a couple of minutes to take a break. But again, Mark, many, many thanks from all of us at Blackboard.